Hey guys, welcome back to some more Bed Wars. Today I want to talk about how I built my PC. So when I was 12, I decided that I was going to switch from laptop gaming to a PC build. And this executive decision could not have been made possible by anyone other than my parents. So around Valentine's Day that year, I was talking to my parents and I was like, hey, so we can make a deal here. My birthday's in May. Why don't we decide that I don't get any birthday presents this year? You know, maybe just like a card from grandma and something from my sister. How about you guys don't get me anything? And then during Christmas, splurge and I'll build my own PC. I'll get you the parts and, you know, we'll build this PC. And this was right before crypto had popped off, so all the graphics cards weren't nearly as expensive. So they looked at the prices of stuff. I told them it was probably going to be around $1,000 at the end of the day. And they decided, you know what? Sure. You've made us a business proposition, and we're going to accept your offer. And I was ecstatic. I was like, okay, I'm finally going to get to be the big YouTube hotshot that I've always wanted to be. And I decided that, you know, this was going to be great. The issue being, I didn't know the first thing about PC building. I had a friend of a friend of a friend in Alaska that I had hit up for PC parts. And he was like, okay, if you're going to want to build a PC, this is how it's going to go. And keep in mind, we're both like 12 at the time, so he knows more than me. And if you had to rate a scale of how much I knew, it'd be 0 out of 10. And if you had to rate a scale of how much he knew, we'd be looking at a 1.5 out of 10. So it was hardly any knowledge, but he knew how to use PCPartPicker.com. And PCPartPicker.com was a Hail Mary. It was our like last resort for any quality PC builds that would be compatible with each other. So he devised a list and said, hey, your budget's $1,000. We're looking at a 1060 graphics card. And I'm like, ooh, 1060? That's a big number. And that big number led me to think, wow, this is like a good model. I should be ecstatic, over the moon even. So we got a 1060, and then we got like a Ryzen AMD processor, like a Ryzen 5 or something. And then we got an Asus motherboard. We got some power supply. I've got no clue what that is. And then we got a random brand PC case. It all totaled up to around $1,000, and it was crazy enough to just work at the performance I wanted it to work at, but nothing more and nothing less. So we had finally picked out all the parts, and Christmas Day comes along, and I was so excited for my new build on Christmas Day that I started making it the second we disbanded from the Christmas tree. Everyone else was like meeting as a family. You know, my dad had made muffins that morning, and everyone's having a great, jolly time. And I'm in my room, like, sweating, hardcore building this PC. Oh, baby, get this bed. So I'm slaving away building this PC, and I can't for the life of me get it to work. I've put all the parts in a million times. I'm watching this YouTube tutorial on a generic PC build, and I'm like, okay, I did everything the video told me to do. What is wrong? And the problem ended up being that I put the power switch in the wrong... If you guys know anything about building PCs, there are a few like tiny switches. This guy's gonna ruin my commentary, ain't he? So if you guys know anything about building a PC, there's this one little set of knobs where all of the like little basic things on the top of the PC box are powered by these switches. So you have like the power button functionality, the reset button, the reset functionality, the power button turning on and off in terms of like the lighting. And I think there's also like an HD lighting or something. I don't really know what that does. But nevertheless, it's a bunch of like little tiny switches for like on and off functions. This guy's gonna die here. Okay, sure. So as I was saying before, Aqua so rudely fell off the edge. Okay, maybe I caused it, but sure, whatever. I eventually figured out that cause, and due to the video, I had finally figured out how to plug it in correctly. I had it like backwards, and for whatever reason that was like a big no-no. You couldn't have the switch plugged in the wrong way. Nevertheless, I got it fixed, and I turned on my PC to see like the Asus startup screen, and I'm like, no way, it's happening. And keep in mind, this is like 6 hours later. at the time, I'm still 12. I haven't aged. I'm just reeling at the fact that this is turning on. And the startup screen is asking me to do something stupid like press enter or whatever. And I'm not reading anything. I'm just, you know, trying to get into my PC so I can play Minecraft ASAP. And it's like, insert your Windows activation key. And I'm like, what? What do you mean insert my Windows activation key? I had no idea that I needed to buy Windows. I thought I would just have Windows. But no, I didn't have Windows. So I go to ask my dad, I'm like, hey dad, so Windows 10 is on Amazon for $120. Can I use your Amazon to buy Windows 10? And he's like, why do you need Windows? And I'm like, because my PC says I need it. And he's like, fine, whatever. And he bought me the Windows key. And thank God he did. Because I needed to play Minecraft. That was a necessity at the time. So I get the Windows key. And I think I needed to download something off his computer. So it would, like, download Windows. You know, you can't just put in the key and then your new motherboard understands that it's Windows. So I download the Windows installer onto a thumb drive. And I go to... Is this guy really going to try and get my bed right now? Where is this guy going? Okay, good talk, bro. So I go to type in the Windows activation key and I let it download for an hour and I'm like so hyper. I'm so anxious that this isn't gonna work that I'm just like, I'm not even using my phone to do anything. I'm just staring at the screen, watching the 1%, 2%, 3%, and it finally gets up to 100%. It takes about an hour and a half. I'm like, oh boy. And then my computer turns on and I'm like, no way, everything works. And I had got like 2 RAM sticks, one of which never worked. So my computer is taking like a year to boot up, and I'm like, that's interesting. My laptop booted faster than this. Why is this taking like a century? Is this guy not gonna die? This guy isn't gonna die? Okay. I'd had a laptop before that, so I was completely caught off guard that it wasn't booting up instantly. So I decided that I was, okay, sure. Maybe I built something wrong, whatever. Maybe one of the parts is defective. So for the next few years, my PC was working, you know, it was all right, but not 100%. Like, I had seen like people's gaming PCs online, and I'm like, why isn't mine doing the crazy things that theirs can do? Because I was a naive kid and I didn't understand that some PCs were built different, much like people. But, okay, cool. I kind of just wrote it off as my PC wasn't top tier. You know, I was on a budget after all. And, you know, the next few years went smooth sailing. I was playing games. It wasn't doing everything I wanted it to do. Like, I wasn't expecting to be streaming back then. So my computer couldn't handle that perfectly. But eventually, it was doing great. My computer was running relatively smoothly. Smooth enough to record at like 40 FPS. It worked, and that was the good thing. So now, as of a few months ago, I decide that I want to upgrade my computer. I want it to do everything I think it can do and more, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I call up one of my friends and I'm like, hey yo, I think I need a new processor. And he's like, okay, well, Intel's the best for what you're doing. If you want to run multiple applications at once and have everything run smoothly, you're gonna want Intel. So I'm like, sure, I'll get an Intel processor. But he's like, make sure your motherboard's compatible. And I'm writing this guy off. I'm like, there's no way I need to make sure something's compatible. Computer is computer. Why doesn't everything support Intel? Spoiler alert, not everything supports Intel. So I tell my dad, hey, this Christmas, I want an Intel processor. So I send him the link, and he buys it. December 22nd comes along. It's like 3 days before Christmas, and I look into it. I'm like, maybe it won't be compatible. And it's not compatible. So the processor wasn't compatible, and I had to go out of my way to find out what I needed to do to make it compatible. Spoiler alert, you can't just make a motherboard compatible with a processor. Let's use a house as an analogy for why not everything works for a motherboard. Let's say you build your house, and it doesn't have enough space for a new water system, like the one that you got when you first built the house. But you buy a new water system, you get it contracted, and you realize you don't have enough space. You don't have enough pins on your motherboard to support this processor. So when I eventually go to check out what I need to make this processor work, this website's telling me I'm gonna need an entirely new motherboard. And that's not gonna work. So I'm like, hey Dad, you know that processor you bought me? Absolutely worthless if I don't get a new motherboard. So here's what we gotta do. We either get a new motherboard or you get a new processor. I can go grab the motherboard and I'll pay for it out of pocket because I made the mistake. He's pissed because he's like, you sent me this. You should have done your research. And I'm like, I know, that's my bad. I'm sorry, man. I come to him like 20 minutes later. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go pick up that motherboard. And he's like, okay, we can talk about this. It's night. I don't want you driving out this late. Let's talk about this and we can decide what we want to do. So we talk about it and we decide that a motherboard might be the way to go. Let's just use this new processor because I got like an Intel 10th gen, which is just far better than my Ryzen AMD 5 or whatever I have. So we're like, okay, we'll get a new motherboard, and you know, while we're at it, let's just upgrade the heck out of this PC and get some new RAM sticks. So I pick him out, I send my dad the links, and I'm like, hey, does this look good? And he's like, sure. So we drop another few $100s on PC parts, and I go pick him up at Best Buy on like December 24th. Under the tree, Santa Claus has come again, and surprisingly, those same parts I bought ended up wrapped by me under the Christmas tree. How coincidental. So I got all the PC parts. Christmas Day comes along. I open them up and I start rebuilding my entire PC. Surprise, surprise, I haven't learned anything and the same switches aren't working. So at this point, I had made a friend who was more familiar with PCs than my friend the first time, and infinitely more familiar with PCs than I am currently. So I decide, hey, this isn't working. I'm like 3 hours into rebuilding. Let's call my friend up. He's like, dude, I'm bowling. I'm like, oh god, what am I gonna do? So he comes back in like an hour and he calls me and he's like, all right, show me what's wrong. So I pull it up and I'm like, okay, so it's not turning on, and I hit the power button, and what had been happening before is the CPU fans weren't moving and my graphics card light had just like blinked. So it looked like it was getting power, it was just shutting down the power instantly. It was something that I still don't know what happened entirely. So I turn it on and what do you know? It works. Why does it work? I've got no clue, but it works. So I'm happy. I'm like, okay, dude, I swear it wasn't working. He's like, okay, sure. And I have to, it's not recognizing my boot drive. A few years ago, I decided that my drive wasn't fast enough and I got an external, like, solid state drive, an SSD, which is like a little bit faster. And it's basically, I'm booting Windows off of something I plug in on top of my computer, which isn't exactly the best idea. Why is everyone dying so fast? What? But essentially, Windows wasn't recognizing that my boot drive was some external thing that wasn't in my computer. I had to do some weird workaround. I don't even remember what I did, but it eventually recognized in like some hidden setting in the boot menu that I had this drive connected. So I set like my internal hard drive like to the very back of the line. It was going to use some non-existent Windows CD I didn't have before it used my actual boot drive. So I finally got that configured. And what do you know, my computer boots up like normal, and now everything's working great. But yeah, basically, I finished building my PC. I then tried to upgrade it. It might have worked out, it might not have. Everything is currently still in as much shambles as it was 3 years ago. And yeah, building a PC is kind of a mess. And if you guys are curious, that Intel processor has made, like, it's not doing any, like, differences in terms of frame rate, but it sure is making a whole lot of difference when I try to record. Like, 60 frames was a struggle for me before, and now it's, like, an expectation. If I'm not recording at 60 frames, my computer's got something freaking wrong with it. But yeah, I'm not going to make you guys watch this entire rest of the game. I've got nothing left to talk about. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to absolutely decimate that subscribe button. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.